The sun hung low over the dusty town of Red Hollow, painting long shadows across the wooden buildings and the dirt-strewn main street. Ethan Harper walked slowly, his worn boots crunching against the hard-packed earth. He kept his hat pulled low over his brow, not just against the glaring sunlight but also to shield himself from the curious glances of townsfolk. Life had not been kind to him lately. His small ranch on the outskirts of town had been struggling for months. Crops had failed, his cattle were thin, and debts were piling up like the dust on the street. Most days, Ethan tried to keep his head down, working from dawn until dusk. But sometimes, the weight of worry pressed so heavily on his shoulders that he felt he might collapse under it. Despite his troubles, Ethan had a reputation for being a man of quiet integrity. He didn't speak more than necessary, but when someone needed help, he was the first to step forward. People in Red Hollow respected him, even if they thought of him as a loner. That afternoon, he was walking toward the market, thinking about the repairs he needed to make to the barn roof before the next storm, when he noticed a commotion near the center of the street. A group of men were arguing loudly, their voices rough and sharp, and a few townsfolk had gathered, watching nervously. The men seemed drunk and aggressive, shoving one another and threatening anyone who got too close. Ethan's instincts told him to stay back, but something about the tension in the air made him slow his pace. He was used to danger on the ranch rustlers, wild animals. But there was something unpredictable in human chaos, something that could erupt and hurt innocent people. Before he could decide what to do, a carriage thundered down the street. The horses were frightened, their hooves striking sparks from the stones, and the driver struggled to regain control. People screamed and scattered, trying to avoid the speeding vehicle. Ethan's eyes widened as he saw a small figure in its path. A young girl, no older than 12 or 13. She had dark hair and eyes that were wide with fear. She was frozen for just a moment, and that hesitation nearly cost her. The carriage tipped, throwing her to the ground with a harsh thud. Ethan didn't think. He ran. He shoved aside a falling crate and reached the girl just as another barrel rolled toward her. He scooped her up gently, feeling her small body trembling against his chest. Dust coated her clothes and hair, and a thin trickle of blood ran from a small cut on her forehead. She clung to him instinctively, as if she knew he was the only person between her and danger. "Stay still," he said in a calm, steady voice, more to ground himself than her. "I've got you. You're safe now." The girl's eyes flickered to his face, and for a moment, she didn't speak. Ethan realized she was scared of more than just the accident. He could see it in her posture, the way she held herself tight, almost as if she was bracing for something worse. She was not used to townspeople, or maybe not used to anyone at all. "Don't be afraid," he added softly. "I won't let anyone hurt you." She gave a tiny nod, and he knew that, for now, she trusted him enough to move. Carefully, he led her behind a nearby building, away from the noise and the crowd. People were still shouting, and some were trying to help, but the girl seemed to shrink into herself with every step. Ethan wrapped an arm around her shoulders, guiding her to a quiet corner where the sun didn't reach so harshly. "Can you walk?" he asked, crouching slightly so he was closer to her level. She nodded again, wincing slightly as she tried to rise. Ethan supported her, and together, they moved a few more steps until they reached a spot where she could sit safely. He crouched beside her, carefully checking her injuries. There were a few scrapes on her arms and legs, and the cut on her forehead needed cleaning, but it was nothing too serious. Still, he knew he couldn't leave her in the street, not with people shouting and the horses still spooked nearby. "What's your name?" he asked gently. The girl hesitated, her eyes darting toward the crowd. Ahioka," she whispered finally. Ethan smiled faintly. "All right, Ahioka. My name's Ethan. You're safe now." Her eyes softened just a little, but she didn't speak again. She seemed to understand that silence was safest for now. Ethan realized that whatever had brought her here, she needed protection, and she would need someone she could trust. He couldn't leave her out in the open, not with the rumors and prejudice that often followed strangers, especially someone like her, through towns like Red Hollow. Ethan scanned the street. People were gathering in small groups, whispering, pointing, but none of them approached him. He could feel their suspicion, and he knew if they noticed Ahioka, questions would come too quickly. Some might see her as a troublemaker or as someone who didn't belong. And in a town where appearances mattered more than truth, that could mean real danger. He had to act fast. "Come on," he said quietly, extending his hand. Ahioka hesitated, but then slowly placed her hand in his. Ethan helped her to her feet, feeling the small tremble in her body as she leaned slightly on him. He guided her along narrow alleys, avoiding the main street where the commotion still rumbled. Dust swirled around their boots as they moved, and the faint smell of hay and horses drifted in from nearby stables. It was a strange comfort to Ethan, who knew the smell of hard work and open land, but Ahioka flinched at the unfamiliar sights and sounds. As they walked, Ethan tried to speak gently, hoping to ease her fear. "You're brave," he said. "It's not easy to stay calm when everything is so loud. But you did it." She looked up at him, her dark eyes meeting his. And for the first time, he thought he saw a small spark of relief there. She whispered, "Thank you." The words were soft, barely audible, but they carried a weight that made Ethan's chest tighten. He had rescued her. Yes, but it was more than that. He had gained her trust, fragile though it was. And in that moment, he understood something about himself. Despite the struggles and the failures, he could still make a difference. They finally reached a small, hidden courtyard behind a row of old buildings. It was quiet, shaded, and safe from the bustle of the main street. Ethan helped Ahioka sit on a low bench, brushing some of the dust from her clothes. She didn't speak, but she didn't move away either. She was still afraid, but she trusted him enough to remain near him. "Listen," Ethan said, lowering his voice. "For now, we need to stay quiet. No one should know you're here yet. Can you do that?" She nodded again, her lips pressed together tightly. The unspoken understanding passed between them. They would stay silent until they could figure out what to do next. Ethan leaned back against the wall, keeping one eye on the street, but mostly watching her. She was small, frightened, and yet there was a resilience in her posture that reminded him of the horses he had raised on his ranch. Strong, stubborn, and unwilling to break completely. He felt a surge of protectiveness that he had never known before. Hours passed slowly. The town began to quiet down as the sun dipped lower, and the shadows grew longer. Ethan shared a bit of water from his canteen with Ahioka and offered her some of the bread he had in his bag. She accepted it cautiously, nibbling slowly. But she ate. That was a victory in itself. By the time the sky turned a deep orange, Ethan knew he had to make a decision. He couldn't keep her in the courtyard forever. Someone would notice eventually, and the longer she stayed in the town, the greater the risk. He would have to take her somewhere safer. Somewhere no one could find them until he figured out a plan. But he also knew that moving too quickly could scare her. He needed to earn her trust fully, not just for a few hours, but long enough to keep her safe. And that meant patience, careful steps, and most of all, staying quiet when the world expected him to speak. Ethan leaned back and watched the last rays of sunlight fade. For the first time in weeks, he felt a flicker of hope, not just for his failing ranch, not just for the struggles that seemed endless, but for the small human connection he had found with Ahioka. She was scared, yes, but she was alive, and he would do everything in his power to make sure she stayed that way. The wind whispered through the streets of Red Hollow, carrying the smell of hay, dust, and the distant river. Ethan tightened his grip on his hat and glanced at Ahioka. She was sitting quietly, her dark eyes reflecting the last glow of the day. In that moment, he realized something simple but powerful. Sometimes, courage wasn't about facing a storm or fighting a duel. Sometimes, it was about protecting someone who had no one else. And he would keep quiet, he decided, for as long as it took to keep her safe. The next morning, Ethan woke early, long before the town stirred with noise and movement. The sky was pale with the first hints of sunlight, and the air smelled of dew and earth. He moved quietly through his small ranch, careful not to wake Ahyoka, who was still asleep on the bench in the hidden courtyard. She had been hesitant at first, but during the night, she had finally allowed herself to rest. That gave Ethan a small sense of relief. She needed strength, and even a few hours of sleep could help her heal from the shock and fear of yesterday. After preparing a small breakfast of bread and coffee for himself, Ethan gently nudged her awake. "Morning, Ahyoka," he said softly. "Time to eat." She opened her dark eyes slowly, still wary, and gave a small nod. Ethan handed her some bread, and she ate quietly, glancing around as if expecting someone to appear and take her away. But he was there. A quiet protector who had no intention of letting that happen. Once she had eaten, Ethan spoke again. "We can't stay here forever. Town folks will notice if you're gone for too long. And if anyone comes looking for you, it won't be safe." Ahyoka's lips pressed together, and she nodded again. She understood enough to know that leaving the town quietly was the best chance she had. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. In her silence, Ethan could sense both trust and fear, two things he had to protect equally. Ethan led her through the back alleys and past the fields that stretched toward the outskirts of Red Hollow. They moved quietly, avoiding the main roads where travelers or townsfolk might notice them. The wind was cool, and the smell of wild grass filled the air, a sharp contrast to the dusty streets of the town. For the first time since the accident, Ahyoka looked around, noticing the open sky, the gentle sway of the grass, and the distant hills. She took a small, cautious breath, and Ethan allowed himself a faint smile. "Almost there," he said, pointing toward a small grove of trees where the land dipped slightly. It was a place he often used for shelter during storms, a spot where no one would easily find them. They reached the grove, and Ethan set down his pack, offering Ahyoka some water. She drank slowly, still cautious, but she was beginning to trust him more. "You're safe here," Ethan told her. "For now, we'll stay quiet, but tomorrow we'll figure out the next step. Do you have family?" Ahyoka shook her head, her dark hair falling over her face. Ethan could see the sadness in her eyes. She had no one here, and the town likely held more danger than comfort for her. He felt a surge of determination. He couldn't leave her to face the world alone. He would find a way to get her to safety, even if it meant risking himself. They spent the rest of the day in the grove. Ethan showed her how to move quietly through the grass, how to spot signs of danger, and how to stay calm when startled. He was patient, understanding that every small step mattered. Ahyoka listened carefully, her eyes wide, absorbing each word. Slowly, she began to mimic his movements, learning how to be cautious without being afraid. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, Ethan realized it was time to return to the ranch. The grove was safe for now, but it was not home. He guided Ahyoka back along the hidden paths, moving quickly but carefully. The town was quieter now, but they still had to be careful. Back at the ranch, he helped her settle down again. She ate a small meal, and for a few hours, they sat together in silence, sharing the quiet comfort of safety. Ethan knew that the bond they had formed in such a short time was unusual, but powerful. They were two people from very different worlds, yet both had been brought together by a single moment of danger. Over the next few days, Ethan planned carefully. He needed to ensure Ahyoka's safety, and he also wanted to help her find a way back to a place where she truly belonged. He couldn't simply hide her forever. That was only a temporary solution. He began by observing the town quietly, looking for anyone who might be searching for her or asking questions. Ethan noticed that rumors were spreading, though none had reached a point that could immediately endanger Ahioka. Still, the awareness that someone could recognize her or draw attention kept him vigilant. One evening, as the sky darkened and stars began to appear, Ethan sat with Ahioka near the small fire he had built outside. He spoke softly. "We'll leave soon. I know a safe place not too far from here. It's hidden, and no one will find you there. You can stay as long as you need." And Ahioka's eyes met his, and for the first time, she spoke more than a word or two. "Will it be safe?" "Yes," he replied firmly. "I promise. But you'll need to trust me. Can you do that?" She nodded, a small but determined movement. That was all the answer he needed. Trust was the most important thing now. The next morning, they set out before dawn. Ethan carried a small bag with some food and supplies, and Ahioka walked beside him, keeping close. They moved through fields and along narrow paths, avoiding the main road. Ethan used his knowledge of the land, pointing out signs of danger, broken branches, footprints, or places where animals had passed. He explained to Ahioka why each detail mattered, and she listened carefully, learning quickly. By midday, they had reached a small, hidden valley. A stream ran through it, and trees provided shade and cover. It was a place few people knew about, and Ethan knew that for the time being, it would be safe. He helped Ahioka sit by the water, letting her drink and rest. "You can stay here for a while," Ethan said. "No one will find you. You can rest, eat, and be safe. After that, we'll figure out how to get you to a place where you truly belong." Ahioka looked around, taking in the beauty of the hidden valley. She smiled faintly for the first time since the accident. Ethan felt a sense of relief and quiet pride. He had done what he could to protect her, and now she had a chance to recover and find safety. They spent several days in the valley. Ethan brought food and supplies, taught Ahioka how to move quietly, and helped her regain her confidence. Slowly, she began to trust the world again, at least in small ways. She laughed softly at small jokes he made, and she even began to speak a little more, sharing stories about her life before the accident. Ethan listened carefully, never interrupting, always patient. He knew that she needed to feel heard and respected. In her stories, he could sense her resilience and courage, and he admired her strength. She had survived fear, danger, and isolation, yet she still had hope. Finally, the day came when Ethan felt it was time to take the next step. He had learned of a nearby community where Ahioka could be safe and cared for until she could reunite with her family. He prepared for the journey, ensuring they had enough food and water. He explained the plan to her, and she nodded, trusting him completely. The journey was not easy. They traveled quietly, avoiding roads and towns, staying alert for any signs of danger. But together, they managed, moving steadily and carefully. Ethan's knowledge of the land and his careful planning ensured their safety, while Ahioka's growing confidence and trust made the journey smoother. Finally, they reached a small settlement where Ahioka could be cared for. The people there welcomed her warmly, and Ethan felt a deep sense of relief. He knew that she would be safe now, and that the bonds they had formed would remain in their hearts forever. Before leaving, Ahioka turned to Ethan, her dark eyes full of gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly. Ethan smiled, feeling a warmth he had not felt in a long time. "Take care of yourself," he said. "Stay strong. Remember what you've learned." She nodded, and then she walked into the settlement, safe at last. Ethan watched her go, feeling a quiet pride and a sense of hope. He had struggled, yes, but he had made a difference, and sometimes that was all that truly mattered. As he turned back toward his ranch, Ethan realized something important. Life would continue to be hard, and challenges would never end. But the small acts of courage, the quiet moments of trust and care, could change lives in ways that mattered forever. And as the sun set over the plains, casting long shadows over the land, Ethan knew that he had done something meaningful, not for fame, not for reward, but simply because it was the right thing to do. He had kept quiet when he needed to. He had acted when he could, and in doing so, he had saved a life.